Right away, I noticed that the sliding glass door was open just a little bit. I could...
Just a little bit? That bitch is wide the hell open. Sup? No.
This happened when I was about 13 years old. One weekend, my parents and I were out of town for work. So I was staying with a friend who lived across the street. Every morning I would wake up and go let the dogs out, feed them, and clean the litter box. Then my friend and I would go play for the rest of the day, sporadically checking on the house. One morning my friend and I woke up very early, still dark out, and looked across the street at my house. Our electric garage kept opening and closing all by itself, constantly. And one of my dogs runs out of the garage. I ran out and grabbed the dog. Then we watched the house for about 5 minutes before we decided to walk across the street to check on it. Thinking it was a glitch, we walk into the garage where I pushed the...
That's not a glitch. No. That's a ghost glitch. You get it? Ghost. Bitch. I don't know. I tried.
Button to make it stop. Now to explain my house, you walk into an entryway, and then the house is split level. You can go upstairs or downstairs. We walk upstairs, flipping on the lights and looking around, and there's nothing. Then we began to walk downstairs towards the basement. As I flip on the stairwell light, which has a dimmer on it, we see a shadow on the wall quickly move away from the bottom of the staircase towards the other side of the basement.
Oh my god, oh my god, oh my god, oh my god. First, I would shit bricks. And then I'll be running haul ass and shit is in my pants.
My friend and I freak out and run out of the back door to my friend's house, where we wake her parents, who call the cops. They come and search the house. Nothing inside. However, they do find footprints in the snow all over the back deck, which wasn't shoveled, and the back door was found unlocked. Nothing was missing as far as we could tell. So
that's sus. Why didn't y'all just shovel the rest of the snow? What?
I cannot imagine what he wanted. I didn't step foot into the house again until my parents came back home. And even then, I basically had to be bribed. Not to mention my room was down in the basement.
Oh my god.
I slept in my parents' room for 2 weeks after that. Kind of funny thinking back on it. A teenager sleeping on the floor of their parents' bedroom. Number 2.
That voice scared the shit out of me. His parents was in cahoots. That's the only explanation. Because why would you? They don't care about him. Because why would they send him in the basement if they cared about him? That's cap.
When I was a kid, I was living with my grandma in an apartment complex in a very poor area. It was a really bad neighborhood, but my granny and I were living in the nicer part, which really isn't saying much. The apartment complex was really small, 3 floors and 12 apartments all in all. But as the neighborhood wasn't exactly friendly, neither were the neighbors. We hardly knew anyone in the complex. People were constantly moving in and out before you even had a chance at saying hello. But then again, the few people we did say hello to were either creeps or criminals. I don't think we were missing out on much. The complex had a huge basement, and each apartment had their own room in the basement. The basement also had a laundry room. The entire basement was creepy as fuck, but it was really quiet down there, most of the time. But anything going on in the complex would eventually manifest into sounds in the basement. On top of that, the heater, which was also down there too, was always making this sound like a dying cat. And every pipe and floorboard down there was really creaky. As a young child...
Who the hell... Hold on. I took my glasses right off, right when that old person came out. Who the hell is that? Hold on. Let me get my eyeball. Yeah. Hell no.
My granny didn't allow me to go down there on my own. Not that I ever wanted to. Even before this particular incident, plenty of bad stuff had happened down there.
It's a basement.
People would often use the basement for illegal activities or to store drugs. A lot of people would move away without cleaning out their rooms, leaving behind the stuff to be found by the landlord. One time the landlord found a meth lab. Another time he found a batch of dead dogs, which
A batch of dead. I would start crying immediately.
had been alive when the resident of the room had been living in the complex, but had starved to death once he had moved out. Anyways, I was 14 when I was first allowed down in the basement on my own. My grandma was getting old, and I was taking over more and more responsibilities at home. Doing laundry was always my biggest terror. Yet as time went by, I got more used to the sounds and the creaks down there. The basement was just a tiny bit less creepy. When I was 15, my grandma had won a new dining room table. Being the old-fashioned hoarder she was, she didn't want to part with her old set. Instead, she wanted it down in our basement room, which of course rested on my shoulders. I went down to our basement with a few chairs, and then into our room. That was when I first heard the noise. The reason I noticed it was that it was unlike any of the noises I usually heard down there. It was repetitive and seemed to have a pattern to it, not like the other noises, which seemed to be random. The noise was strong in our room, but not outside of it, like someone was knocking on the walls in the room next to ours. I put my ear to the wall, trying to figure out where the noise was coming from. I remember thinking that perhaps it was rats or pests running around inside the walls. Like that, the pattern was even more obvious. 3 short knocks, then 3 long knocks, followed by 3 more short knocks. I immediately had the feeling like I heard that pattern before, but couldn't quite put my finger on why. I went back up to my grandma and asked her about it.
I just want to say something. No disrespect. No disrespect. His grandma looked dead.
She reminded me that it was Morse code for SOS, which she had taught me a long time ago. I told her I heard...
You know what's crazy? I'm 29, and I've seen SOS before. I've heard it, but I never really understood what it meant, or like what it means. Like when somebody is in danger or whatever, or they're trying to get out, or they're by themselves or whatever. SOS. I don't know what is that? What is it? That's that. It's an acronym for something, but I don't know what it is. SOS. So SOS means not only someone over shoulder, but it also means that they're in danger. Okay, I guess. Would it make sense to say save our souls, or I don't know.
Down in the basement, and she went down there with me to investigate. When she heard it too, she called the police. Well, the police showed up with the landlord, then had each resident open their basement room. The residents that weren't home, or otherwise unavailable, had their basement rooms kicked open. In one of the rooms, the police found one of those big old-fashioned closets. Think of the one from the first Narnia movie. Inside, they found a young woman who had been abused, starved, and pretty much tortured. The owner of the room was an elderly man who was living in the apartment above ours. As it turns out, she had been down there for at least 5 days.
Oh my God!
And while a lot of other people had apparently heard the noise, no one else had recognized it as an SOS signal. I'm a male.
So, SOS Is that real? Like the signal, like the knocking? Is that real? You do what? And then you do. Three fast knocks, three slow knocks, three slow knocks. That's all.
And I was 22 when this story occurred.
You know what else? What else I don't understand? Morse code.
The encounter happened when I moved back to my hometown after graduating. At first, I had moved back in with my parents until I found a job. At first, it was great seeing more of my parents, as I hadn't seen them much studying in a different city. But the novelty soon started to wear off, and I was missing the independence I had living in my own apartment when I was away. I found a job a few months after and decided I was going to find my own place and regain my independence. I began searching online and was looking at both letting agencies and private landlords, scoping around for places that were within my budget. I had gone for a few viewings that I turned down as they weren't what I was looking for. This is when it happened. I came across an ad online for a place with a great location within my budget. The ad had contact details for Alan with a standard looking email address. I emailed Alan and found out the place is still available on site and arranged a viewing. Alan doesn't work or live in the town and won't be able to meet me before 7 p.m. No problem. We can both do it the next night. So I show up to the address. It looks just like the photos from the outside.
Wow.
I'm getting more and more excited, and I can't believe my luck.
Me too.
I knock on the door, and a large man...
Oh my God. Oh my God. Oh my. If you ever meeting somebody that you do not know, if you ever meeting somebody that you don't know, or you ever meet or going somewhere with somebody that you don't know, don't go by yourself. Or if you do go by yourself, come strapped and come ready.
I'm 6'1", 190 pounds, and this guy was towering over me, easily 6'4". He almost looks disappointed as he extends his hand. I'm Andy. The name was Alan on the ad, not
Andy? Where would he at? Oh, glad.
red flag yet. Could just be he doesn't like advertising his real name. As I shake his hand, I say my name. He responds, I thought you would be a girl. I have a unisex name. At this point, I'm assuming he prefers girls, as they tend to be tidier than guys. I say, don't worry. I'm quite OCD with my living space. I like to keep it clean. He just sort of nods, still looking disappointed, but as if he's trying to hide it. He seems uninterested as he shows me around the place. I actually really love it so far, but anytime I show my interest, he seems to be trying to put me off. For example, I said I love the big windows, and he responds with telling me that they can be drafty sometimes. Just small things like that. I'm still brushing this off as him thinking I won't be as clean as a female tenant. We finish looking around the place and I tell him I'm really interested in renting, but first, I want to see the basement. It was advertised with spacious basement in the listing. He then states that there is no basement.
Oh.
I just look at him confused and point out it's stated on the ad, and there's a door in the apartment that he didn't open during the tour, which I'm assuming is the basement entrance. He's beginning to act a bit sketchy and says he's reconsidering including the basement and that he might be just using it for storage instead. The basement was a big positive for me on the ad. As
He on some you type shit. Who you got down? You got somebody locked up down there? Jesus.
I pictured man caving it or throwing parties down there with friends. As the apartment is in my budget, I say I would really like to see the basement, and if I liked it, we could possibly work something out, like me paying more to include the space with the rent. He seems unsure, but as I'm being adamant, he finally relents and says he will show me, but first he has to go down and tidy up.
What?
At this point, I'm reconsidering hanging around, as it seems like a red flag, but at the same time, He said he was going to use it for storage, so I figured it might be a bit messy down there. So I decide to wait. Andy disappears into the dark basement. I'm waiting for a light to flicker on when he reaches the bottom of the stairs, but it stays dark, and I hear some shuffling around for a minute or so, and then the light comes on, and he shouts up that I can come down. I begin to get this really uneasy.
So there's no switch at the top of the steps. You have to go down there in that dark ass basement just to turn on the light. That's us.
Feeling, and I'm considering leaving, but I brush it off because I do still really dig this apartment. I head down the stairs and reach the turn near the bottom when Andy perks up. Watch your feet. That's when I look down and notice it. There's a thin line of that plastic kind of clear wire stretched across the stairs. You know, the kind that's used for washing lines. It runs across about ankle height, right before the bend, and tied around the ends and secured by screws. He sees the what the fuck look on my face and quickly chimes in that the last tenant had a dog and he painted models or something down there. The wire was there to keep the dog out, and he hasn't had a chance to remove it yet. Pretty flimsy excuse, considering the ad said no pets. I'm thinking the only reason he didn't remove it was because I was at the top of the stairs and I would have seen. Obviously at this point alarm bells are ringing, so I don't wander far from the bottom of the stairs. Andy says, "Well, here it is," and a minute later is quickly trying to usher me back up the stairs. Relieved, all I see down there is boxes and a tied up bin liner. Typical storage stuff. No weird smell or anything. Just a normal looking basement. But then I notice it in the corner, just as I turn to go back upstairs. There's an old mattress poorly propped up in the far corner, with a sheet covering it, but you can see the bottom corner, and it's clear what it is. It looked like he tried to hide it with a sheet, but couldn't see in the dark. We head back upstairs, me leading, and I remember to step over the wire. Andy immediately closes the door. "We'll get in touch if you want the place, and maybe we can work something out with the basement." He's acting super sketchy at this point, and I can tell he wants me out right away. So I say, "Sure, it's a lovely place. I'll be in touch. Nice meeting you." Then I'm quickly ushered out. I called my best friend when I left and told him what happened, and that Andy might be planning on luring a girl down there and tripping her on the stairs to do God knows what. He says maybe I'm being paranoid, but it does sound sketchy as fuck. I decide better safe than sorry and call the police station on a non-emergency number and explain to them what happened. The police thank me and say they'll check it out, but they really don't sound sincere. I expect to hear a follow-up. I called back about a week later to inquire, and they told me they can't release any information. But I keep an eye on the local news, and nothing comes up that sounds like Andy. The ad did get removed the next day though. Maybe I put him off the idea. Maybe it was me being paranoid, and maybe there was nothing malicious afoot, or maybe Andy followed through with his plan and was never caught.
A couple of years ago, after graduating from college and living in an apartment for a couple of years, I finally bought my first house. It was sort of small, but had 2 floors and a basement. I got a pretty good deal on it because it needed a little bit of work, but over the first few months, I got a lot of improvements done. Anyways, one day after work, I was going to...
I think the only way I would have a basement is if I built the house myself and I know exactly what's in there. Stop! Come here. Lay down.
Into the basement to do some laundry.
Thank you.
The basement was mainly unfinished, but I did have some extra furniture and a few boxes down there. As I was passing by the main room of the basement to the laundry room, I thought I noticed something out of the corner of my eye. I stopped in place and looked over. Then I leaned down to get a better look. When I could get a better angle, I saw that there was a man hiding underneath a table that I had sitting in the basement. I must have been frozen in shock, because it took me several seconds to believe that there was actually some random guy in my basement. The man made eye contact with me, and then he moved. He got up from underneath the table and ran into a nearby...
Go back. Oh. What the fuck? Him hiding behind that table is like it's like a person hiding behind a broomstick. I don't, you know. And then he had the audacity. Like, you don't think they can see, like, where you going?
underneath the table and ran into a nearby room. The next thing I knew, all of the lights went out and I couldn't see anything at all.
Hell no.
I figured he messed with the fuse boxes down there and switched them off or something. I literally couldn't see anything at all. And unfortunately for me, I had left my phone upstairs charging and couldn't use anything as a flashlight. I was probably about 15 or 20 feet away from the stairs, and I wanted to get out of the basement as soon as I could. I started to slowly walk in what I thought was the direction of the stairs. It was very quiet down there. Then I heard noises of moving coming from a ways away, but I couldn't tell exactly where. I didn't know who this guy was in the basement with me, or how he got in my house, but I was terrified of him possibly being dangerous. I quietly moved a bit faster towards the stairs, and when I thought I would be getting to the steps, I tripped on something and fell down.
What?
When I did, I heard more movement. This time it sounded like the guy was closer to me. I decided to crawl to the stairs, and I constantly felt around for the steps. Soon I was able to find them, and I began crawling up the stairs on my hands and knees. At last, I felt myself reach the door to the upstairs.
Get up!
Then I began to stand up to open the handle. When I did, I felt my right ankle suddenly get grabbed. Whoever it was grabbed my leg and pulled me back to the ground. Then we started to go back down the stairs. As this happened, I desperately kicked my legs around as fast as I could. I could feel the man grabbing at my legs and trying to get closer to me. I could feel the man grabbing at my legs, trying to pull me down. I was able to get one really good kick in, and it seemed to get him in the head. I felt his grip loosen, and I quickly kicked away and stood back up, then opened...
You just now running up the steps? You just now running up the steps?
the door. I wasted no time in shutting the door behind me and running to grab my phone. Then I ran out the back door to the house and called the police. I didn't stop running until I was off of my property and in the street. The police said they would have someone there within a few minutes. I continued to move away from the house though, because I didn't want to take a chance on seeing the man again. I didn't even care if he left. When the police arrived, sure enough, the man was gone, and my front door was left open. I don't know how the man got in my house or what he was doing down there, but those were probably some of the scariest moments of my life that day. I was very careful to always lock my doors after that.
Oh my
and I
God.
only lived in that house for a few more months before moving.
It's the fact that he ran like he didn't see him.
This story happened many years ago when I was a kid. If I had to guess, I'd say I was maybe 12 years old. My family lived in a pretty average house in a big neighborhood. We had one level and then a basement. I was always kind of scared of the basement because I was a kid and it would usually be dark down there. Overall, it just seemed scary to me. We didn't really use the basement much for anything other than storage though. We did have a little setup of an old couch and a couple of chairs with a TV though, but it was only used occasionally. One night when my parents were gone, it was just my older brother and me at home. I had to go down to the basement to get something, and as I opened the door to the dark basement, I was immediately a little bit scared. I ignored the feeling though, and turned on the light and then walked downstairs. I went down and noticed that something looked different. As I got closer, I saw that all the furniture that was set up in the basement had been rearranged.
God damn.
It was as if someone had moved everything to the other side of the room. It wasn't really messed up, but just rearranged. I was startled and ran back up.
Yeah, me too. I don't care if one of the pillows. What are you doing? I don't care if one of the pillows was moved an inch or a millimeter to the left or to the right or back and forth. I'm raising hell. I'm hauling assing. What? I'm haul assing and I'm calling the cops.
Stairs. I asked my brother if he had rearranged things in the basement, and he shook his head and said no. I told him to come downstairs. Look with me. So we both went downstairs and saw how everything was rearranged differently. My brother told me that he had just been down there the day before, and it wasn't like that. We both agreed how it was really strange, but knew our parents must have done it.
Okay.
When they got back home later that night, we asked them, but to our surprise, they said they hadn't moved anything at all. We all went back downstairs once again. When we did, everything was back to normal.
Oh my God.
All the furniture and everything was just how it had been before. My dad went around and looked everywhere and said everything seemed to be perfectly in place. Nothing else like that ever happened, and my family only lived there one more year before moving. Still to this day, though, I always wondered what exactly happened down there.
What are you talking about? You know exactly what happened down there. What? Get out of my face.
A few years ago, when I was in high school, I used to get home and play video games almost every day. I mainly played video games in the basement, where we had a pretty big TV, and I wouldn't bother my parents who liked to watch TV upstairs when they got home from work. Our house was a split level, and our basement wasn't really below the ground. Well, I guess half of it kind of was in the front, but in the back of the house, we had a sliding glass door that opened up to the backyard. One day when I got home from school, I immediately went to the basement to play video games like always. Right away, I noticed that the sliding glass door was open just a little bit. I could...
Just a little bit? That bitch is wide the hell open. Like y'all at a cookout or some shit.
feel the cool air blowing inside. I went over and shut it and immediately wondered who had left the door open, because I knew that I hadn't. Then I went to the couch and started gaming. I played video games until my parents got home and called me up for dinner. I ate with them and then did homework in my room and then went to bed. I had forgotten all about the door being left open downstairs and didn't even mention it to my parents.
You ass! You ass! You clock ass! You clock ass!
The next day, though, when I got home from school, the door in the basement was open once again, but this time it was much wider. I also noticed that quite a few things in the basement appeared to be messed up. I got a bad feeling and ran upstairs and called my parents.
Oh, yeah?
They told me to call the police, so I did and then waited for them to arrive. When they got there, they searched the entire house and property, but nobody was found. It seemed there had been someone in our basement, but they had left that morning. I was glad they were gone, but it was really creepy to realize that whoever was in our basement was likely in our house with us all night.
Yo, that officer look like they do not care. Talking about
September 4th of 1978 was an exciting day for Scott and Amy Van Dal, as their Aunt Kathy was coming.
if I was in the house and I saw two white people, they probably jogging or whatever, but if I saw them running, I would have been like, hell no, nope. And I would have locked everything in my house.
stay with them for a few days in their small Alaskan hometown. The children's father wasn't in the picture anymore, and their mother, Margaret, was not only looking forward to seeing her sister, she was greatly relieved to be getting some help around the house. Little did they know, their lives as they knew them were about to change forever. When Kathy arrived in the early evening, both she and Margaret took 13-year-old Scott and 8-year-old Amy down to a local bar and arcade named Good Time Charlie's, letting them binge on soda and video games until just before 10 p.m. When the two women announced their bedtime, the children protested.
Is that a big-ass thing of fries? Damn.
Eventually allowed themselves to be driven back to the small log cabin where they lived. However, Margaret and Kathy weren't quite ready to call it a night, and after dropping the kids back at the cabin, they decided to return to Good Time Charlie's to continue drinking. Shortly before departing, Margaret told her children not to stay up too late and that they'd be back sometime after midnight. Kathy then told Scott to lock the door once they departed, and in reply, Scott apparently laughed. It was later established that he laughed because the door's lock was broken, and despite his insistence that she have it fixed, his mother had neglected to do so. Once their mother and aunt were out of sight, the Fandel kids decided to...
So y'all just gonna leave them there with the front door not locked?
sneak over to their neighbor's place, the Luptons, to play with their 5 kids. It's not clear what a bunch of kids were doing out so late on a Monday night, but one of the neighbor kids later reported that nothing seemed amiss with the Fandel kids, who were happy and relaxed when they came over to visit. They stayed there until the noise got too loud, at which point the Lupton's mother emerged to corral her children indoors. She then shooed the Fandel children back to their cabin and told them to stay indoors. She later stated that she believed the children had obeyed her commands and returned to the cabin, and a passerby confirmed that lights were on at the Fandel place when they walked by at around 11:45 p.m. These lights were apparently switched off when Margaret and Aunt Kathy arrived home sometime between 2 and 3 o'clock in the morning. When they entered the cabin, they found a pot of water boiling on the stove. On a nearby countertop, a package of macaroni and a can of tomatoes lay untouched. The women apparently took the pot of water off the stove before clearing away the food, but at no point sought out the children to chide them for doing something so dangerous without parental supervision. It was later implied that the women were so drunk that they didn't want the kids to see them in such a state. On top of that, Margaret was due into work at 8:30 a.m., so as much as we can understand why we might want to get as much sleep as possible, it still seems odd that neither of the women would check on the children. As we mentioned, Margaret awoke around 8 a.m. to begin her shift, but still didn't check on her children. Aunt Kathy said she slept until noon, and was the only one to check on the kids for around 12 hours. When she found they were absent from the cabin, she assumed they were at school, but the neighboring Lupton kids would later state that the Fandel kids, who they usually walked to school with, were nowhere to be seen that morning. When Margaret arrived at the restaurant she worked at, she apparently called her children's school, intending to scold her daughter for not checking in with her before she left for school. But school staff were forced to inform her that neither of her children had shown up that day. Panicking, Margaret told her boss that her children were missing, and she needed to be excused from her shift so she could look for them. According to Margaret, her employer refused and demanded she work the rest of her shift.
Hell no!
So, instead of looking for them herself, she says she was forced to rely on her sister to find them. It wasn't until 3 p.m. that day that Alaska State Troopers learned of the children's disappearance.
That's crazy. And that's real. The fact that we have businesses, bosses, managers that care more about the business than humans, than kids. Come on.
Full 15 hours after they'd last been seen. Upon inspection of the family's cabin, the police found no signs of any kind of struggle, but the fact there was still a pot of water on the boil when the women arrived home suggests Scott had been interrupted while cooking something. But if he walked outside the cabin with the stove still on, he'd obviously expected a return, so initially, the main theory was that the kids had been lured outside, then snatched before they had a chance to get back inside. Naturally, one of the first suspects was Roger Fandel, the children's absent father. He lived all the way down in Arizona, but within a week, he had flown up to Alaska to help look for his kids. He cooperated fully with the police investigation and was subsequently ruled out as a suspect. Police established that Roger and Margaret's marriage had broken down due to alcohol abuse on Margaret's part and infidelity on Roger's, and at no point did police deem Roger a danger to the children's well-being. Yet Margaret and Kathy, as well as a handful of their blood relatives, seemed to insist that Roger was somehow responsible, given that his Uncle Herman was a vocal proponent of taking the kids back by force. This Uncle Herman was later questioned by police, and although he was honest about having said such melodramatic things, he too was cleared of responsibility. The police were so convinced Herman was lying that they actually dug up his backyard, but not a shred of evidence was found. One witness claimed to have seen a black sedan speeding away from the cabin in the middle of the night, with the driver and passenger being identified as two carnival workers. They were indeed working at the Alaska State Fair on the day the children went missing, and had moved on the next day, but it was later confirmed that Margaret had let the men stay at her home for a single night just a few weeks prior. They were mostly definitely aware of children, and definitely had access to the children, yet despite remaining suspects, the two carnival workers were never fully charged with either kidnapping or murder. Following her children's disappearance, Margaret Fandel became deeply depressed, and this only exacerbated her problems with alcohol. 2 years following her children's disappearance, Margaret left Alaska behind, abandoned the very place she had once sought solace in. Shortly after she left, the cabin she and the children lived in was burned down under mysterious circumstances.
Hell no.
In 1980, Margaret remarried and sobered up, later stating that she prayed daily that the children would be found alive and well. Her ex-husband, on the other hand, firmly believes his children are deceased, saying that if they were still alive, then surely they'd have made an effort to contact him in the 4 decades since they'd disappeared. Margaret's brother Terry had made a handful of bizarrely specific claims since their disappearance, such as stating that Scott was murdered, but that Amy is somehow still alive. He's also stated that he believes her to be living in Anchorage, Lompoc, California, or Drummond in Montana. Terry has never fully explained why he believes his niece is living in such a specific place, and we're only left to imagine how he's come to such conclusions. Yet the question remains, what happened that caused the children to vanish that night that they were left alone? And if someone took them, who was it? One thing we have to keep in mind is that Scott Fandel was extremely protective of his little sister, with those close to the children saying he was Amy's devoted protector. If someone tried to take the girl, there's a very high chance that Scott would have put up a considerable amount of resistance, yet there was no evidence of such a struggle in the cabin. This suggests that the children left the cabin of their own volition, possibly enticed by someone they knew and trusted. There's also the little detail of the cabin's lights, which were apparently switched on at around 11:45, but switched off a few hours later when Margaret and Kathy returned from Good Time Charlie's. Like most children, Scott and Amy were said to be scared of the dark, so either they turned them off knowing they were unlikely to return, or someone else had done so. There's also the possibility that Scott and Amy simply walked off into the forest and died of hypothermia, but not a single shred of their remains have been found in the years that followed, and even if they'd succumbed to the cold and been eaten by wild animals, at least a few scraps of bone or clothing would have been left behind. So if someone actually visited the cabin and took the children, who might have the motive to do so? As we've already mentioned, the number one suspect would obviously be the children's biological father, Roger. One of the reasons Roger and Margaret's marriage had broken down was her excessive drinking, so there's a chance that Roger viewed her as an unfit mother and viewed their abduction as a kind of rescue. His surprise visit might have excited the children so much that they remembered to turn the lights out but forgot to turn off the stove, especially if their father told them they needed to leave as quickly as possible. But why would Roger resort to abduction over some kind of appeals process? Well, it came out years later that Roger wasn't actually Scott's biological father, only Amy's, so it's highly unlikely that he would have won any kind of custody battle. But how would Roger have known the children would be alone that night? Sure, he lived down in Arizona, but that doesn't mean he didn't travel up to Alaska surreptitiously, watching the cabin for the right time to make his move before disappearing the children completely. And I do mean completely because if Scott and Amy are still alive, they'd be well into their 50s by now, having forged entirely new identities over the years, presumably with the help of their father. They'd have gone to school, maybe even college, started employment, maybe a family too, all without ever being detected. It's a plausible theory, but even saying it out loud brings it into disrepute. Sure, the kids might keep their mouths shut to spare their father any legal repercussions, but to remain totally incognito for 50-something years would be extremely difficult, and therefore highly unlikely. And so, we're forced to look elsewhere for the most probable explanation. Then, even as unlikely as it seems, we have to consider the possibility that Margaret and Kathy are responsible for the children's disappearance. The fact that Margaret claims she left her children home alone so she could carry on drinking shows just how reckless she was, even in a small town where she felt they were safe. What's more, Margaret's story is so inconsistent and nonsensical that it makes all the sense in the world to view her with suspicion. Drunk or sober, she completely neglected to check on her kids, either when she arrived home or before she left for work, then had the nerve to call Amy's school to scold her for not checking in. Then there's the issue of her boss refusing to let her leave work after finding out her children were missing. This never once had been corroborated, and no matter how troublesome her financial situation was, the idea that a mother might be content to just sit and work while her kids were in danger is extremely doubtful. However, some say these same financial troubles motivated Margaret to sell her children into a black market adoption ring, and even that her second trip to Good Time Charlie's was an effort to gain some liquid courage for what was to come. That would definitely explain the lack of a struggle, and the complete lack of any evidence regarding their whereabouts almost completely rules out the possibility of them being killed by their mother or their aunt. Maybe one day we'll read a news story in which one of the Fandel children finally comes forward. Maybe we're only one regressive hypnosis session away from an internet-breaking headline. But it seems more likely that the truth is Scott and Amy's disappearance will forever remain a mystery. And in the absence of any definitive explanation, we find ourselves considering the most cynical of possibilities.
This story right here really sounds like a missing 411. It really does. Yeah, that shit was crazy. Something definitely mysterious happened. And it's also weird how it just mysteriously burned down. Like, Mr. Ballin, if this is real, Mr. Ballin needs to do that. Needs to do a story on that. Because that shit was crazy. If there's any animated videos you want me to react to, let me know that in the comment section below. But as always, keep it cool, keep it classy, and I love you. Stay happy, my family.